Introduction. There's a place inside you that no one else can fully see. A space beyond the noise of the world, untouched by timelines, untouched by comparison. It is deep, sacred, and often unexplored. This place is the garden of your mind. The idea might sound poetic at first glance, even whimsical, but stay with me. Think about it. Gardens don't just appear. They are created, shaped, and tended. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Seeds fall. Some we plant consciously, others blow in from the world around us. Over time, they take root. Some grow into beauty and strength. Others tangle themselves into weeds that choke out the light. Most of us walk through life unaware of just how much has been growing in the background of our thoughts, beliefs, memories, and emotions. We assume the chaos is normal, that the patterns of our inner world are fixed. But what if I told you they're not? What if I told you your mind isn't just a reflection of what has happened to you, but a living, breathing ecosystem with power you've barely begun to access? That's where this book comes in. The Garden of Your Mind, Secrets You Never Knew Existed, isn't about changing who you are. It's about remembering, reclaiming, rediscovering the parts of you that have been buried beneath the noise. You see, within your mind lies a whole network of patterns, potential, and forgotten truths, hidden just beneath the surface. And like any garden, with the right attention, these can be uncovered, reshaped, and brought to life in ways that nourish you from the inside out. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Your mind isn't just a space where thoughts come and go. It's a landscape, a sacred ground, one that stores your stories, your wounds, your hopes, your wiring, your dreams. Everything you've lived is still living there. The question is, what are you growing now? This book is a journey inward, but not in a heavy, clinical sense. Think of it as a walk through the paths of your own mind, with a flashlight in one hand and a soft curiosity in the other. Together, we're going to examine the seeds you've planted, some with care, others without knowing. We'll look at the roots of your beliefs, the weeds of fear or self-doubt that might be crowding out your joy. We'll talk about pruning, resting, blooming, not just as metaphors, but as real internal processes that shape everything from how you think to how you love, create, and show up in the world. You don't need to be fixed. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're just being invited to tend to the place inside you that may have been neglected, forgotten, or misunderstood. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Seeds of Thought. What you plant is what you grow. Let's begin where all things begin, in the soil of the mind, with the seeds that quietly take root without you even noticing. These seeds are your thoughts, but not just the fleeting ones that come and go. I'm talking about the deep-rooted patterns, the beliefs that shape your inner narrative, the background thoughts you've carried for years that now feel like truth. Most of us were never taught to be gardeners of our minds. We weren't handed a manual on how to nurture healthy thoughts or recognize the weeds. Instead, we absorbed. From our earliest days, we soaked up words, energies, expressions, and emotions. We watched how the world responded to us. We listened to how others talked about love, success, worth, and failure. And without knowing it, we began planting seeds, some good, some limiting, some inherited from people who never questioned them either. You might not remember the first time you thought you weren't enough, or the first time you felt like you had to earn love, rather than simply receive it. But if you slow down and trace the root of your most recurring fears, your doubts, your emotional triggers, you'll likely find that those ideas started as small seeds planted long ago. Maybe a careless comment from a teacher. Maybe a parent's silence when you needed affirmation. Maybe a society that taught you to hide your softness or hustle for your worth. These thoughts grew quietly, and like any seed, they responded to attention. The more you watered them, whether through repetition, emotion, or environment, the more they took hold. Over time, they became part of your inner landscape. And here's the wild part. Your outer life began to mirror that inner garden. If you believe, deep down, that you're unlovable unless you're useful, your relationships will reflect that. You'll overgive, overextend, and feel guilty for resting. If you carry the seed of, I must be perfect to be safe, you'll spend years exhausting yourself trying to control outcomes, terrified of failure or vulnerability. And you might never stop to ask, where did this even come from? Is this even mine? That's what this chapter is all about. Waking up to the quiet power of your thoughts and realizing that many of the ones running the show were never chosen by the conscious version of you. They were inherited, absorbed, or built from survival. And that means you can replant. You can clear the soil, pull the weeds, and start again with intention. But before that, you have to pause and observe. One of the greatest superpowers you can develop is the ability to witness your thoughts without immediately believing them. Just because a thought appears in your mind doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's repeated doesn't mean it's right. And just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's healthy. So take a moment. Listen to your inner dialogue. Not the polished version you show the world, but the one that speaks when you're tired, scared, or alone. What is it saying? Whose voice does it sound like? Is it compassionate or critical? Encouraging or fearful? This isn't about judgment. It's about awareness. The more aware you become, the more power you have to replant. This is where the garden metaphor becomes so rich. Because in a real garden, if something's not growing well, you don't shame it. You don't blame the plant. You check the soil. You look at the light, the water, the root system. You assess, adjust, and nurture. And your mind deserves the same kind of gentle curiosity. The most beautiful gardens in the world didn't start that way. They were cultivated, carefully, over time, with love and patience. And so can your thoughts be. When you start to understand the mind as something you can shape, something alive and capable of healing, you begin to reclaim authorship over your life. You stop living from old programming. You stop reacting out of fear. You begin to choose to plant new seeds, ones rooted in truth, in self-compassion, in joy, in freedom. And here's the secret most people never learn. One single new seed, planted with intention and nurtured with presence, can transform the entire landscape of your mind. It may start small, almost invisible, but one day, that seed becomes a tree. That tree becomes a shelter, and that shelter becomes a new way of being. So ask yourself, what have I been planting? What's been growing in me by default? And more importantly, what do I want to grow now? The seeds in your mind don't just shape your thoughts, they shape your reality. What you believe, at the deepest level, becomes the lens through which you see the world. And as an extension of that, it becomes the energy you project, the relationships you attract, the risks you take or avoid, the dreams you allow yourself to pursue or abandon. Now imagine waking up to the realization that you've been living in a garden planted by other people's fears, limitations, and expectations. How would that change the way you move through life? Would you still let shame or doubt run the show? Would you still shrink yourself to fit someone else's narrative? Here's something that might surprise you. Not all bad thoughts are weeds. Some of them are survival mechanisms in disguise. That hypercritical voice in your head, it might have been trying to protect you from rejection. That constant inner pressure to succeed, it might be rooted in a childhood need to feel seen or valued. These thoughts were never meant to destroy you. They were trying to keep you safe with the tools they had. But now you have new tools. You have new awareness. And that gives you the power to release what no longer serves you. You see, your thoughts are alive. And the more attention you give a thought, especially when it's emotionally charged, the deeper its roots grow. That's why you can't just think positive and expect everything to change overnight. You're not working with wallpaper. You're working with roots, with patterns, with a mental ecosystem that's been forming for years, maybe decades. But here's the beautiful part. Your garden wants to heal. Just like nature always leans toward balance, your mind leans toward wholeness. When you create space through rest, reflection, meditation, journaling, or even just quiet moments of honesty, you begin to notice which thoughts bloom and which ones rot. You begin to recognize the inner voice that feels expansive and true versus the one that contracts you into fear or self-betrayal. And this is where intention comes in. Once you become the gardener instead of the passive observer, everything shifts. You start asking different questions. What kind of life am I growing toward? What beliefs do I need to water in order to get there? Which ones need composting, broken down and recycled into wisdom, not wounds? You also start noticing your inner climate. When you're anxious, are you in drought mode? No nourishment, no stillness. When you're stuck, are you overcrowded with too many competing voices, too much mental noise? When you're uninspired, Are you cut off from your inner sunlight, your purpose, your play, your curiosity? Tending the garden of your mind isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about realizing that every moment is an opportunity to choose differently, to shift the energy, to plant something new. Even the act of noticing a thought, just noticing it without attaching to it, is a small revolution. Because in that moment, you're no longer the thought. You're the observer, the witness, the one who gets to choose what grows. Let that sink in. You get to choose. Not all at once. Not every single time. But more and more, as you become more conscious, more grounded, more compassionate with yourself. And yes, some seeds will still fall from the sky. You'll hear a passing comment that stings. You'll scroll past a post that triggers comparison. Life will offer you seeds constantly, some nourishing, some toxic. But you now have the wisdom to say, not every seed deserves my soil. So maybe today is the day you begin again. Maybe you sit in silence and ask your mind, what am I ready to release? Maybe you write down the thought that's been haunting you and ask, who gave this to me? And do I still want to carry it? Maybe, just maybe, you decide to plant something wildly new. Something like, I'm allowed to grow slow. My value isn't tied to productivity. I am safe to be seen. I'm already enough. Chapter 2. The Hidden Roots, Beliefs Buried Beneath the Surface. If thoughts are the seeds in the garden of your mind, then your beliefs are the roots. And roots, as you know, aren't easily visible. They're underground, often tangled, deep and old. You don't see them when you walk through the garden. But make no mistake, they're what hold everything up. They're what keep it alive, or slowly choke the life out of it. Most people go through life without ever really questioning where their beliefs come from. Not just religious or political beliefs, but the quiet ones, the beliefs about themselves. The ones that say, I'm not good enough, I always mess things up, I'm too much, or I need to prove my worth to be loved. These aren't random thoughts. They're old roots. And like any roots, they didn't just appear overnight. They were formed slowly, over time, often in response to how you were treated, what you experienced, and what you were told about who you are. The tricky part? These beliefs don't always announce themselves. You can go for years acting on them without realizing it. You might keep sabotaging relationships, never quite sure why. You might avoid opportunities, telling yourself it's about timing or logic, when really, there's an invisible belief whispering, you don't deserve that. You may chase perfection, not because you love excellence, but because a quiet root once told you that love must be earned. These roots don't just sit there, passively. They shape everything. They shape the kind of people you're drawn to. They determine what you tolerate and what you reject. They dictate how you show up in conflict, how you handle rejection, and how you celebrate your wins, if you even allow yourself to celebrate them at all. And here's where it gets interesting. Not all roots are bad. Some are deep and steady and life-giving. They ground you in truth, confidence, self-respect. You might have a belief that says, no matter what happens, I'll find my way. Or, I am inherently worthy, even when I mess up. Or love is something I don't have to earn. These beliefs, they're gold, and they're just as powerful, if not more so, than the limiting ones. The challenge is learning how to tell the difference. One of the most powerful things you can do is become curious about what's beneath the surface of your reactions. Not to judge yourself, not to fix yourself, but to understand yourself. If you're easily triggered by criticism, ask yourself, what do I believe about myself that makes this feel like a personal attack? If you feel unworthy of a compliment, gently wonder, what belief do I hold that rejects this affirmation? If you always say yes, even when you want to say no, explore what root is feeding that people-pleasing. Is it fear of abandonment? Fear of being seen as selfish? A belief that love is conditional? This kind of reflection isn't always comfortable, but it is liberating, because once you can name the belief, you can work with it. You can choose to trace it back, challenge it, and gently begin to loosen its hold. Now, let's talk about where these roots come from, because most of them didn't start with you. Many of your deepest beliefs were shaped in childhood, before you even had the language to process what was happening. They were passed down from parents, teachers, culture, religion, sometimes directly, through words, sometimes indirectly, through silence, absence, tone, or repetition. And because children are sponges and also egocentric by design, we often internalize those experiences to mean something about us. Maybe you grew up with a parent who withheld affection when you failed or made a mistake. You might have learned, I have to be perfect to be loved. Maybe you were constantly compared to a sibling or made to feel invisible. You might have decided, I'm not enough. Maybe you were praised only when you achieve something. My worth is tied to what I do. These aren't just stories. They become root systems. And unless we look closely, they grow deep. But here's the most important truth you need to know right now. Just because a belief is buried deep doesn't mean it's permanent. Beliefs are not facts. They are interpretations. And they can be rewritten. They can be unearthed, examined, and replaced with ones that reflect who you really are, not just who you were conditioned to be. Healing isn't about erasing your past. It's about reclaiming your authorship. It's about deciding what gets to stay in your soil and what you're finally ready to uproot. You don't have to do it all at once. In fact, you shouldn't. This isn't about force. It's about patience. Gardening takes time. So does transformation. But each time you pause and ask yourself, what belief is driving this behavior? You're bringing light to what was once hidden. You're loosening the grip of something that doesn't belong anymore. And maybe the most beautiful part of all, once you start unearthing those old roots, you create space. And in that space, you can plant something new. A belief that says, I am allowed to be a work in progress. Or, I can be loved without performing. Or, I am safe to take up space. These new roots, they'll take time to grow, but they will. With nourishment, with care, with honesty. And one day, you'll look around and realize your inner garden has changed. Not just on the surface, but from the ground up. When you begin to uncover your hidden beliefs, it's not just an intellectual exercise. It's an emotional excavation. You start noticing the moments where your nervous system flares up, your chest tightens, your voice trembles, or your instinct is to shrink. These aren't just reactions. They're signals. They're breadcrumbs that lead you back to the root. Let's say you feel a surge of panic when someone disagrees with you. On the surface, it might seem small, but if you sit with it, without rushing to fix or justify, you might hear a deeper voice whispering, if I'm not agreeable, I'm not lovable. That's a belief, and it didn't come from nowhere. Maybe you had to manage someone's emotions growing up. Maybe your needs were ignored unless you were pleasant and easy to be around. Over time, this becomes internalized. Safety equals compliance. Or perhaps every time you try to rest, you feel guilty. You tell yourself you're lazy, unmotivated, wasting time. But what if underneath that judgment is a belief that says, my value is based on my output? That's not just a thought. It's a root system fed by cultural praise, family expectations, or old trauma, where achievement meant survival. INFJs especially are prone to absorbing beliefs from their environments without realizing it. You feel things so deeply, you sometimes mistake someone else's fear, shame, or pressure as your own. And because you long to maintain harmony, you unconsciously adapt, twisting your internal truths just to keep the peace. That's why this work isn't just about awareness. It's about returning to yourself. One of the most powerful practices you can begin is questioning the voice in your head when it tells you something painful. That voice might sound like your own, but it's often an echo of someone else's projection. So ask it gently, whose belief is this? You'd be amazed how often the answer reveals a face, a tone, a memory you hadn't thought about in years. That's when you know you've struck root. And once you find it, you don't have to attack it. You don't have to hate the part of you that learned to survive through these beliefs. You just bring compassion. You sit with it, maybe for the first time, and say, I see why you showed up. I understand why you thought this was the way. But we're not living from that place anymore. This is what healing looks like. It's not loud. It's not performative. It's quiet and brave. 1,000 tiny conversations with yourself that say, I don't believe that anymore. I get to choose again. This also means honoring the roots that have supported you. Not everything hiding beneath the surface is broken. Maybe you grew up believing you could rise after failure. That love was meant to be gentle. That your voice matters. These roots are gold. And the more you identify them, the more you can water them, strengthen them, let them take up space. Because that's the point of all this. Not just to weed out the pain, but to make room for something far more powerful. Self-trust, self-worth, self-leadership. You begin to build a belief system that matches the person you are becoming, not the one the world tried to mold you into. And when those new beliefs take root, they start producing fruit in every area of your life. You speak up more clearly. You walk away from what drains you. You say yes with joy and no without guilt. You attract people who mirror your worth instead of your wounds. It's a process. Sometimes you'll feel like you've healed something, only for it to resurface months later in a new form. That doesn't mean you failed. It means the root system runs deep, and healing doesn't always move in a straight line. But every time you revisit that root with more awareness, you loosen it a little more. You bring more air, more light, more truth to the places that were once buried in silence. Eventually, you begin to feel it. Space. Not empty space. Sacred space. Room for new life. Room for aligned thoughts, nourishing beliefs, and honest self-connection. Room to grow into the person you've always been beneath the noise. This is the magic of working with the hidden roots. You stop living from what was planted in fear and start planting in love. You stop surviving and you begin to root. Chapter 3. Pruning the past. Letting go to let things grow. This chapter is about pruning. Not cutting to destroy, but cutting to create space for new life. In any healthy garden, even the most beautiful plants need to be trimmed back. Dead leaves have to be removed. Overcrowded branches need to be thinned so light can come in. And the same is true for the garden of your mind and the story of your life. Here's what no one tells you. Letting go isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It's not a loud goodbye or a scorched earth moment. Sometimes it's just a quiet decision to stop carrying what no longer fits who you're becoming. It might be a belief, a pattern, a person, or a version of you that has outlived its season. But no matter what it is, you'll feel it. The heaviness, the tension, the sense of being stretched in two directions. And your soul will start whispering, it's time. But pruning is hard, isn't it? Especially if you're deeply loyal. Especially if your heart sees the potential in people and situations long after they've stopped giving you life. Especially if your mind tries to rationalize why you should hold on a little longer. They didn't mean it. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong. What if things change? Sound familiar? Letting go becomes even harder when we attach meaning to what we're releasing. We make it personal. We think if I let this go, it means I failed, or it means I gave up. But that's not the truth. In fact, the opposite is true. Letting go is often the most sacred kind of self-respect. It says, I love myself enough to stop settling. I love myself enough to stop performing. I love myself enough to make space for what aligns with my present truth. You might be holding on to relationships that have turned hollow, not because you want to, but because there's history, because you remember who they used to be, because you're afraid of what the space will feel like when they're gone. But relationships, like seasons, have cycles, and sometimes love is not holding tighter. Sometimes it's loosening your grip and trusting that if it's meant to bloom again, it will find its way back with deeper roots. Or maybe it's not a person you need to let go of, but an old identity, a role you played for so long that it feels like who you are. The fixer, the overachiever, the peacemaker, the one who's always okay. And yet, inside, you're not okay. You're tired of pretending. You're ready to be real. But shedding that identity feels like stepping into the unknown, doesn't it? Because if I'm not that, then who am I? That's the gift and the grief of pruning. It leaves you with emptiness before it fills you with newness. There's a gap between what was and what will be. A sacred in-between space that feels like floating, like loss. But it's actually where regeneration begins. And this is where trust comes in. Trust that what you release was never meant to grow forever. Trust that the parts of you that seem to be falling apart are simply making room. Trust that nothing real, nothing aligned, will ever leave you empty for long. Here's something else to remember. Pruning doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean erasing the past or pretending it didn't matter. You can honor what was and still let it go. You can love someone and still walk away. You can look back with gratitude and still move forward with courage. In the garden of your mind, you are both caretaker and creator. You decide what stays and what no longer belongs. You get to walk around your inner landscape and gently ask, is this belief still serving me? Is this connection still alive? Is this version of me still real? And if the answer is no, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're evolving. Letting go will likely feel uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not danger, it's growth. And growth, real growth, is often quiet and painful and wildly liberating. So let yourself mourn what needs to go. Let yourself cry for the friendships that changed, the dreams that shifted, the identities you outgrew. That grief is sacred. It softens the soil. It prepares the heart for what's next. Because once you prune, something beautiful starts to happen. You begin to notice space, light filtering in, air moving freely, new ideas taking shape. You feel lighter, clearer, more grounded. You realize you were never meant to hold everything. You were meant to hold what aligns. Sometimes, the act of pruning doesn't even look like letting go of a person or a belief. Sometimes, it's about releasing how you thought your life would unfold. Maybe you had a vision, a job you were supposed to land, a relationship that was supposed to last, a version of yourself that was supposed to feel more confident, more successful, more together by now. And yet, here you are, standing in the middle of a garden that looks nothing like what you planned. The first instinct might be shame. Why didn't it work out? Did I do something wrong? But what if that disappointment isn't failure, but redirection? What if what fell away was never the real path, but the path you thought you had to take to be worthy? Letting go of a dream is one of the hardest forms of pruning, not because the dream was wrong, but because the attachment to that version of life was so tightly woven into your sense of identity. You saw yourself going there. You wrapped your worth around that outcome. So when it starts to fade or shift or slip away, it feels like a piece of you is disappearing with it. But here's what's true. Anything that can fall apart wasn't your foundation. It was your scaffolding. It got you to a certain height. It supported your growth for a season. But eventually, scaffolding has to come down so the real structure can stand on its own. You may be in that season now. The pruning season. The unraveling. The in-between where you're not quite who you were, and not yet who you're becoming. It can feel raw, exposed, like standing in a garden right after the storm, with petals on the ground and branches bare. But look closer. The soil is still alive. The roots are still intact. And soon, from the places that felt empty, something new will begin to stir. This is the rhythm of renewal. Not just once, but many times in your life. The more you walk with awareness, the more you'll come to expect it, not with dread, but with reverence. Because pruning isn't the end. It's preparation for more depth, for more truth, for a life that feels like you. You'll also notice that as you begin to prune internally, your external life will respond. The way people treat you may shift. Some connections will strengthen, others will fall away. You may find yourself drawn to different environments, different rhythms, even different desires. That's not you being inconsistent. That's you realigning with a version of yourself that's been waiting underneath the clutter. And let's talk about resistance, because it always shows up here. The mind will tell you, but what if I need that later? Or what if I regret letting go? That fear is normal. It's your nervous system reacting to unfamiliar space. But you can gently remind yourself that clearing space doesn't invite loss. It invites freedom. You don't need to know what will grow in the new space right away. You just need to trust that nothing truly aligned will pass you by. That anything rooted in love, truth, and wholeness will find its way back to you in its healthiest form, or be replaced by something even better. So if your life feels like it's shedding right now, good. That means you're paying attention. That means you're making room. That means something new is on its way. Not in the rushed, frantic way that the world pushes, but in the quiet, intentional way that your soul unfolds. Chapter 4. Cultivating Presence, where the magic actually happens. Here's the part where everything starts to come alive. If planting thoughts is how you begin, and pruning your past is how you make space, then presence is the rich, nutrient-filled soil where growth actually takes root. It's not just a feel-good concept. It's the very ground on which your transformation happens. Presence is one of those words we hear tossed around a lot. Be present. Stay in the moment. Come back to now. But let's be honest. It's a lot easier said than done. Especially when your mind is used to running ahead, reliving old conversations, overanalyzing future scenarios, or replaying mistakes from years ago like they happened this morning. Presence takes practice. But more than that, it takes choice. We often don't realize how much life we're missing by being mentally elsewhere. You could be sitting in a quiet room, a hot cup of tea in your hands, the sun pouring through the window, and yet your mind is racing, caught in a story that has nothing to do with the beauty in front of you. Or maybe you're with someone you care about deeply, but instead of hearing them, you're lost in thoughts of what you should have said earlier or what might go wrong tomorrow. This is what a distracted mind does. It fragments your life into pieces. It pulls you away from the richness that only the now can offer. But here's the secret no one tells you. Presence isn't just peaceful. It's powerful. It's where clarity lives. It's where intuition speaks. It's where creativity flows and truth lands with a thud that makes your whole body say, yes, this is it. When you're present, you're fully available to your life. You see the nuance. You catch the subtleties. You respond instead of react. And perhaps most importantly, you feel. Not just the easy stuff, but the hard stuff too, which is why many people avoid presence. It makes them feel too much. And yet, that's where the transformation hides. You can't heal what you refuse to feel. You can't change what you won't sit with. And you certainly can't create a new life while constantly escaping the one you're living. Presence invites you to be with yourself. Fully, kindly, without judgment. That means when a thought surfaces, you don't run from it. You observe it. When emotion rises, you don't numb it. You breathe through it. You ask it what it needs. You remind it that it's not alone. That's where real self-trust is born, not in performance, but in presence. It's also in presence that you begin to catch the subtle lies of your mind. You know, the ones that say, you're not ready. You're not doing enough. You're falling behind. Those voices often live in the past or the future. But when you bring your awareness to the moment, something happens. The noise gets quieter. The truth gets louder. You remember who you are, not the wounded version, not the over-functioning version, but the grounded, spacious version that's always been here, just beneath the surface. There's a deep kind of peace that comes when you realize you don't have to earn your worth moment by moment, that you can be still and valuable at the same time, that your existence isn't something to hustle for, it's something to feel into. Right here, right now. Presence doesn't always look poetic. It's not always stillness and candlelight. Sometimes, presence is gritty. It's sitting in the middle of discomfort and choosing not to distract yourself. It's having a hard conversation with yourself. It's looking in the mirror and not turning away. It's choosing not to abandon yourself in the moments when you need yourself most. And here's something wild to remember. Presence is not just about what's happening around you. It's about what's happening within you. You could be in a noisy cafe, kids screaming, phones buzzing, but if you're tuned into your breath, your body, your heart, you are present. You are in the moment, even if the moment is chaotic. That's the kind of presence that changes your life. That grounds you in your own power. Now, I'm not saying you'll live in presence 24/7. You're human. Your mind will wander. You'll get distracted. You'll check out from time to time. And that's okay. The goal isn't perfection. It's returning. It's the practice of catching yourself in the future or the past and gently guiding your attention back to now. No shame, no guilt, just awareness. Because when you master that, you begin to notice what your life is really made of. Not the big wins or the breakdowns, but the in-between, the quiet glances, the ordinary mornings, the laughter over nothing, the internal shifts no one else sees. That's where your life is unfolding. That's the part worth being awake for. Presence isn't an escape from life. It's a deep dive into it. So today, if all you do is sit with yourself for a few minutes and feel, not fix, not analyze, not avoid, then you're cultivating presence. And if you can do that again tomorrow and the next day, even in small moments, then the garden of your mind will begin to change. It will soften. It will listen. It will bloom. Not because you forced it to, but because you finally showed up for it, fully and lovingly, in the now. And here's something worth sinking into. Presence isn't just about mindfulness practices or pausing to breathe, though those help. Presence, at its core, is about relationship. Your relationship with yourself, with your inner world, with your body, your energy, your rhythm. You can't build that kind of relationship if you're constantly running, whether it's running toward the future or away from the past. Think of it this way. Your mind is used to noise. Background hum. Mental tabs open all the time. You've got one thought worrying about what you said 2 weeks ago, another planning tomorrow's schedule, another obsessing over what that text really meant. And underneath all of that noise is you, your real self, waiting to be heard, waiting for you to be still long enough to remember who you are without all the distractions. For INFJs especially, this is sacred territory, because your mind is rich, layered, always spinning multiple threads at once. It's beautiful, yes, but can be exhausting when left untended. When you live too much in your head, you lose your grounding. You begin to feel disconnected, even when everything on the outside looks fine. You might function well, but internally, you're dried out, spiritually parched. That's when burnout sneaks in, not from what you're doing, but from how long it's been since you were truly with yourself. And presence is what replenishes that inner well. It doesn't require hours of silence, just honesty, just intention. Presence says, I'm here with myself. I'm not abandoning myself in this moment. Whether you're in joy or grief, chaos or calm, presence says, this is where I am, and that's okay. You start to see that presence isn't about controlling life. It's about meeting it, moment by moment. And when you meet life where it is, you begin to respond from your truth rather than your trauma. You stop saying yes out of guilt and start saying yes because it aligns. You stop rushing through your days and start noticing the way your body softens when you slow down. You stop living from obligation and start creating from authenticity. Presence also has a way of sharpening your intuition. INFJs are intuitive by nature, but that gift gets clouded when your attention is hijacked by fear or future tripping. The more present you become, the more clearly you hear that still, small voice within. The one that knows when it's a no, when it's a yes, when it's time to pause, or when it's time to leap. That voice doesn't scream. It whispers, which is why presence matters. Because only in stillness can you hear your own wisdom. Another quiet benefit of presence is compassion. When you're here, really here, you see people differently. You see yourself differently. You're less reactive, more gentle, less consumed by stories, and more connected to what's actually unfolding. You start to notice the small victories, how you chose peace instead of control, how you gave yourself grace instead of judgment, how you stayed instead of shutting down. And little by little, your life starts to change, not because of something external, but because you change how you meet the moment, because you decided to tend to your own garden, not just in theory, but in practice. So when the world pulls you in 100 directions, remember this: your power lives in your presence. Your healing lives in your presence. The deepest joy, the softest strength, the truest peace. It all begins with your ability to return to the now. Chapter 5. The Bloom. Becoming who you were always meant to be. This is where it all comes together. Where the soil you've tended, the roots you've examined, the weeds you've pulled, and the space you've created begin to show something you've maybe longed for, but didn't fully believe was possible. A life that reflects your soul. A life that doesn't just look good from the outside, but feels aligned on the inside. A life that blooms. The bloom is not a finish line. It's not some grand destination where all the pain disappears, all the questions are answered, or everything finally makes perfect sense. It's subtler than that. Softer. It's the slow awakening to your own wholeness. It's the quiet but certain realization that you don't have to become someone else to feel fulfilled. You just need to come home to who you already are. The bloom begins when you stop running, when you stop performing, when you stop outsourcing your worth and finally rest in the truth that you are enough. Not because you've checked all the boxes, but because you're you. In that sacred space, your gifts begin to rise naturally. Your voice gets clearer. Your values take shape. And you start moving through life in a way that feels less like striving and more like flow. You begin to choose differently. You protect your energy with loving boundaries, not guilt. You speak honestly, not harshly, because you've learned that honesty is a form of intimacy. You honor your needs because you finally believe they matter. And when someone doesn't understand you, it doesn't crush you the way it once did. Because now, you understand yourself. The bloom is not perfection. It's integration. It's the merging of who you were, who you pretended to be, and who you're becoming into something real, something rooted, something resilient. You start showing up differently in your relationships too. You're no longer trying to prove your worth by fixing everyone around you. You're not overextending to earn love. You're not shrinking to keep the peace. Instead, you bring your full self to the table, flaws, gifts, tenderness, strength, and you invite others to do the same. Some people will meet you there, some won't, but you'll no longer sacrifice your peace to hold onto what no longer fits. You'll also begin to feel more connected to your purpose, not because you found a perfect job title or a 5-step plan, but because you know what lights you up. You know what kind of energy you want to bring into the world. Whether you're creating, teaching, nurturing, writing, healing, or simply being present for the people around you, you feel aligned. And that alignment creates a sense of fulfillment you can't fake. Even your pace begins to shift. You stop rushing. You slow down enough to actually savor life. You notice the color of the sky, the way your breath feels on a quiet morning, the way your laughter echoes when you're with the right people. And you start building a life that allows you to feel those moments, not just pass through them. The bloom is a quiet revolution. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't need applause. It's rooted in authenticity. It's nourished by integrity. It's lived from the inside out. But perhaps the most powerful part of blooming is this. You begin to trust yourself, not just when everything is going well, but even in uncertainty. You don't crumble at the first sign of doubt, because you've cultivated a solid inner ground. You've walked through your shadows. You've faced the hard truths. And now you know that no matter what comes, you have what it takes to meet it. Not alone, not without fear, but with grace. And here's something tender to remember. Blooming doesn't mean you're done growing. In fact, blooming means you've entered a rhythm, a sacred cycle of shedding, nurturing, and rising again. You'll keep discovering new parts of yourself. You'll keep healing, softening, expanding. That's not regression. That's life. That's your garden continuing to evolve. You don't have to force it. You don't have to chase it. Just keep showing up with honesty, with curiosity, with compassion. What's most beautiful about blooming is that it often happens without fanfare. There's no grand applause, no sudden transformation that everyone notices. It happens in small, sacred shifts. You realize you no longer over-explain yourself just to be understood. You catch yourself choosing rest without guilt. You start speaking up even when your voice shakes, and you notice it shakes less over time. The bloom sneaks up on you, not because it's hidden, but because it's unfolding in your being, not just your doing. It's a soft confidence, a steady calm, the kind of inner knowing that says, I've got me now, not in a harsh, self-sufficient way, but in a gentle, grounded way that comes from experience, from presence, from love. Sometimes blooming looks like joy, but sometimes it looks like grief. Grief for the years you spent in survival mode. Grief for the parts of you that tried so hard to be what others needed. Grief for the time you spent shrinking, doubting, apologizing for your light. Don't run from that grief. Let it be part of the bloom, because it means you're aware now. And awareness is a sign that you've arrived. You'll start noticing how the world responds to your bloom, too. You'll begin attracting people who resonate with your energy, not just your mask. You'll draw on relationships that feel mutual, safe, expansive. And you'll be able to discern when something isn't right, not because you're paranoid, but because your intuition is finally free to speak. That's the beauty of alignment. It sharpens your awareness and softens your need to prove. The bloom also brings clarity. What used to confuse you now feels obvious. What used to trigger you no longer holds the same power. What used to drain you gets released without drama. And the things that feel like soul yes, you follow them, not because someone told you to, but because your whole body lights up when you do. This is where life becomes art. Not something you rush through, but something you co-create. Each day becomes a brushstroke. Each choice, a color. Each conversation, a shape. You're not waiting for a breakthrough anymore. You are the breakthrough. You're living from within instead of reaching outward for validation. And even when life gets hard again, because it will, you'll walk through the difficulty differently. You'll know when to pause and breathe. You'll know when to ask for help without shame. You'll know how to return to yourself, over and over, with grace. That's the strength of someone who's bloomed. Not invincibility, but resilience. Not perfection, but presence. You'll also find that your blooming naturally inspires others. Not because you're trying to lead or fix or guide them, but simply because people can feel your authenticity. Your peace becomes contagious. Your boundaries become a mirror. Your joy becomes permission. Without even trying, your very presence becomes an invitation for others to bloom in their own time. So if you're reading this and wondering, am I blooming yet? Maybe pause and check in. Do you feel a little more at home in yourself than you used to? Do you forgive yourself a little faster? Do you speak more kindly to the parts of you that are still healing? That's blooming. It's not a sudden reveal. It's a daily return, a practice, a pulse, a promise you keep to yourself over and over, that you will not abandon your soul for the comfort of others or the expectations of a noisy world. You are allowed to bloom slowly, to bloom imperfectly, to bloom and rest and bloom again. There is no right timeline. There is only your path, your pace, your truth.